This is the Advertising Blueprint with Ryan Pancoke.
Hello, welcome back. This is Ryan Pancoke with the Advertising Blueprint podcast. This is for small business owners who want to learn a little bit more about advertising strategies and how to grow their small business. So today we are going to talk about traditional advertising. These are things we've used for years and years and years. And the biggest thing I want to go over in this episode are pros and cons of each one and the best ways that I've seen it work. I typically tell all my clients that all advertising works if you use it the right way. And the key phrase in that term is if you use it the right way. So I'm going to go over some pros and cons, and I'm also going to go over maybe some tips, things I've seen that work. So first thing I want to go over is mailers. So there are two kinds of mailers. There are mailers that you can send in a group where you're in one envelope, you're with 50 different people. And then there's also, it's like your own personal mailer where you're mailing out, like a 5x7, and you get the front, the back, it's all yours. So first let's go over the group mailer. Now, when it comes to the group mailer, some things that I do like about it is you actually get more bang for your buck. So when you do your own personal mailer, the big cost is not in making the mailer itself. You might make one of those for 1 or 2 cents a piece. The hard cost is in the stamp. So when you mail out to that house, you are paying for that stamp by yourself. Now with a group mailer, when there's 50 people all in one envelope, all 50 people are sharing the cost of that stamp. So basically, if you send out let's say like a group mailer, you might be able to send out, 50,000 mailers for around $1,500. But for you to mail out your own personal mailer, that might cost you, 50 cents per. So now you're talking for that same 1,500, you might be mailing out 3,000. So 50,000, 3,000. Again, you can kind of see you can get way more bang for your buck. Now let's go over some of the pros and the cons. First off, with a group mailer, so again, pros are it's cheaper. Number two is maybe some people might look for it because when they look through it, there's a whole bunch of deals. So people who are looking for deals are there, right? So those are good things. Bad things, cons. They've shown a vast majority of people throw it away. They don't even look at it. So maybe 80 to 90% of your money won't even ever be seen. It's just going right in the trash. Number two is usually when people do mailers, they typically like to make some sort of offer or some sort of deal or a discount. Now, that doesn't sound terrible, but one thing people can get very addicted to are discounts. So think of the last time you paid full price for, let's say like a pizza. You don't pay full price for pizza because you've been trained through your life. If I go online, if I look at a mailer, if I go to their website, if I do this, I can get a discount on this pizza. And that's one of the biggest downfalls of a mailer. It is you are conditioning these potential customers on, hey, I'll give this at a discount. I'll give this at a discount. I'll give this at a discount. If you do that over and over and over, they're not going to come to you unless they have a discount. So now when it comes to a personal mailer, some of the pros are it's a little more upscale. It's a little bit nicer. So if you're going for high end, that's probably the way to go. Now also too, it's one nice thing about it, it's if you were in like a group mailer and someone throws away, you're never going to be seen. But even if someone throws you away, you probably got at least 2 to 3 seconds of them visualizing it and saying, what is this, seeing it. And it's not a huge impression, but it is an impression. So that's nice about it. And again, the biggest con is it costs a lot of money. So the biggest tip I would say on mailers, I would recommend mailers to any business that want to stay more local. So for instance, let's say like a dentist. They've proven that like over 90% of people will typically see some sort of dentist within a few miles of where they live. They're probably not going to drive all the way on the other side of town to come see you as a dentist. So if you're a local business, maybe you're a hairdresser, maybe you're a nail salon, maybe you're a dentist, something like that, where well, there's 1,000 of these in the city. I just want people within 1 mile of me or 2 miles of me. That's really where I need to hit. Mailers are a good option for you. So next I want to go over are billboards. So billboards, again, everything works if you use it the right way. The way that I've personally seen billboards work the best are 2 ways. Number 1 is directional. If you're telling people, hey, take your next left and there's a McDonald's. Hey, at your next exit, there's a place for you to, there's this restaurant, this hotel. I think directional usually works for billboards. It does a really good job. You're just telling people this is where you go. If you're not right on the main highway or right off the main street, if you're off of like that beaten path, not a bad way to go. Also, the second way I've seen it work well is if it's some sort of event. So this month, the circus is in town. Hey, did you know that this comedy show host is going to be here this month, or something like that, some sort of event? I think those also do well. For the billboards where they're up all year, month in, month out, those are the billboards that I don't typically see eye to eye on the value and how well they work. Now, it is true that you're getting a lot of impressions because people drive by in their car and they see it, and that's a lot of impressions. But if you ask most people if their average drive to work is 15 minutes, they might see, let's just say 10 or 15 billboards. They probably can't name off more than 2. You're driving 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. You might see that billboard for 2 seconds. You can't have a long message on there. You can't really tell people anything. So it's more of a logo than anything else. I mean, you might be able to get a couple words, but nothing major. So if you're going to use a billboard, use it for some sort of events or use it to tell people where to go. Now, if you're a huge Fortune 500 company and you've got hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising, I'm sure they're going to buy those billboards. But for those small business owners that might have anywhere between a $1,000 and a $10,000 budget, I mean, even a $20,000 budget, I still don't know if I would do billboards unless I was telling someone where to go. So the cons are basically you just don't get a lot of information. You get people for 2 or 3 seconds and they don't remember it very well. So, okay, next thing I want to go over is print in newspaper and magazines. So first let's go over magazines. Magazines pros are, I think they work if you get to a very, very niche market. So what I mean by that is, let's say if you're trying to target people 65 plus, there might be like a seniors magazine. Okay, that might not be a bad fit. Let's say if you have a gardening tool and you go into a home and garden, into a home and garden magazine, or let's say if you're a landscaper and want to go into the local home and garden magazine, that might not be a bad fit. So that's the good things about, with sort of magazine advertising is you can go in those niches. Don't buy 8 or 10 magazines, buy one. Find that one magazine, that one niche that you really want to hit the best, maybe be in that. So the cons are basically they don't perform as well as some of the other medias that we've tried. Typically what we do through our advertising agency is we will phone track everything. So we actually put different phone numbers on everything and see how well this works. One huge pro about print is you can tell how well it works. It's easy to track. Well, typically magazines don't perform as well as some of the other medias. But again, if you're trying to hit that niche, it's not a bad deal. And now with newspaper, it is the elephant in the room. Newspaper is going down year after year after year. And for the most part, the prices are not going down year after year after year. So at some point, you are paying way more money to reach way less people. And every year it gets worse and worse and worse. So now, that's not to say newspaper's dead. I have a lot of clients who still pay for the newspaper, still do very well in the newspaper. If you are a business that's trying to target people 65 plus, healthcare is huge in newspaper because people who typically have medical problems are usually elderly. So newspaper still performs very, very well for those people. But again, cons are just the price and how well it works. I mean, year after year, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So that is newspaper and magazines. Now I want to go over radio advertising. So this is something that, again, everyone's going to say something different. Here's just what we've seen. So typically the good things about radio is it's usually cheaper than like a TV. You're hitting a mass amount of people because anyone gets that radio for free in the car. They typically, people have, let's say alarm clocks at home. People like the radio, Now, we typically only buy the radio is if we have some sort of event or some sort of sale. So if you're not trying to drive people in for this weekend, or maybe you're trying to hire someone and this week you've got a hiring bonus or something like that, that's the way that we use it. We typically don't just brand ourselves over and over and over. It's just the effective rate and how long you may remember that ad may not be as long as what you would get with TV or something like that. So now we do still have clients who buy radio and they still do well in the radio. Now, what we typically do, a tip for the radio, is we only buy the morning drive. So the morning drive is from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. So a lot of people think that what is killing radio nowadays is satellite radio in like your newer vehicles. Maybe it's podcasts. Maybe it's you're listening to Pandora or Spotify. That's not it. The number one killer of radio is your cell phone. It's a lot of people jump in their car and they make that phone call. They're calling their brother, they're calling their sister, they're calling their mom, their dad, their children, they're calling their spouse. Whoever it is, that's what hurts radio a lot. So one time that people don't typically make those phone calls are early in the morning. You typically don't call anyone at 6, 7, 8, 9 a.m. when you're driving to work unless it's an emergency. I know that if I got a call at 7:30 a.m. from one of my friends, the first thing I would say is, what's wrong? If they had nothing wrong, I'd say, why are you calling me? Text me. Don't call me at 7 in the morning. It's too early, right? So we buy that morning drive because people are more likely to be listening to that radio, listening to that morning DJ host, listening to what's going on. So your ad's more likely to run. So that's how we typically use radio. Now with your podcasts and buying your Pandoras and your Spotifys, that's something I would probably classify in more of sort of the digital realm. But just to kind of talk about it real quick, it does cost a lot of money. It's not cheap. Typically, you have to, starting off, it might be anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 a month. Now, one nice thing is you can really narrow things down, and who knows, maybe someone's going to buy, for some business owners on this Spotify is when I put up my podcasts, and maybe an ad will be read on my podcast. Who knows, So, buying podcasting is still fairly new. But people sort of argue about how well it works. We've done in the past, and you have to spend a lot of money to get those impressions over and over and over. So if you do buy it, don't buy it for a whole month. Really try to narrow it down and say, with my $3,000 budget or $5,000 budget, I only want it to run on these 3 days, because there's so many impressions, millions of impressions. If you're buying 100,000 impressions, well, if there's 10 million a month and you only get like 100,000, you're just barely just a little blip on the radar. So really narrow that down, hit them over and over and over. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is TV advertising. So TV advertising, there are two kinds of TV advertising. There is your cable TV advertising, and then there's your broadcast advertising. So for your cable advertising, and we can even lump in, is like your OTT, which is your digital, that's your YouTube TV or Hulu's, things like that. So for your cable advertising, pros are TV. They've proven when you have that message through TV, people can see you, they can hear you. Because you're bringing in more of the human senses, people actually remember the ad longer. It's been proven. Every Fortune 500 company all spend the most money on TV. They're doing that for a reason. Google spends more money on TV than they do the internet, and that's Google. So all that being said, TV still is king. People literally, they center the whole life around their TV. If you go to someone's house, their main room where everyone hangs out is the TV room. So that's one of the few things where with technology, everything's getting smaller. TVs are just getting bigger. So now when it comes to your cable TV, that's totally different than your broadcast TV. Cable TV is when you're buying your secondary networks, which are like your ESPNs, your Home and Garden channels, your Fox News, your CNN, your MSNBCs, your TBSs, TNTs, stations like that. So when you buy stations like that, the one good thing about it is you can narrow things down just like you do in radio. So if you're, let's say, like a sports bar, and you say, I want to be on ESPN, it's probably a pretty good buy. Let's say if you do something for home improvement, let's say if you sell granite countertops, being on the Home and Garden channel might not be a bad buy. Now, here are the downfalls of buying that. First off, it's very, very segmented. So when you buy your ESPN, TNT, TBS, things like that, if I'm watching it on, let's say Time Warner, and I'm watching it through that system, or I'm watching it through Cops, that's the only system I see that on. So if I buy, let's say, like an ESPN through Time Warner, if I'm not watching on Time Warner, if I'm watching it through Hulu, I don't see your ad. If I'm watching it through YouTube TV, I don't see your ad. If I'm watching it on satellite through let's say like a direct TV, I don't see your ad. Even though I'm watching the same ESPN at the same time, I'm not seeing your ad. So because it's so segmented and there's so many different options, it's really hard to capture the entire market. The only time we ever buy any cable advertising anymore is when it is a very niche audience where we know this is where we want to go. So maybe like on, again, maybe like a sports bar is like on an ESPN, or maybe you're buying the Home and Garden channel, but we typically don't buy a lot of cable advertising where it just goes everywhere. Again, it's just so segmented and your cost per thousand is much, much higher. Now, the one that we do spend the most on is broadcast TV. Broadcast TV, your major networks are your ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox. Those are your four major networks. Those are networks that anybody can get. It doesn't matter if you're watching it through Hulu, if you're watching it through YouTube TV, if you're watching it. They make all of those four networks local for local news, encased for the emergency broadcasting system. So they do that for a reason. So if they need to get out some message where something terrible is happening, they can do that very rapidly. Now, we buy a lot of broadcasts because if you buy one of those four stations that I just mentioned, before when you bought it on your cable, you only bought it on that one system. Broadcast, it doesn't matter what in the mouth, you see it everywhere. So you can actually hit a vast majority of the market very easily. This is where companies are spending most of the money on. This is where people are at. So Pros are it reaches the most people, and also with it being on TV and you get that message of sight, sound, motion, emotion, you draw that customer in more and they actually remember your ad more. And then, and then the biggest cons are it's super expensive. It's super expensive because you're reaching so many people. I mean, there are some markets we're in where you can be on the late views and reach 100,000 people with one ad just like that. So, I mean, buying the Super Bowl can be crazy expensive, but you're reaching 50, 60, 70% of the market with one ad. I mean, that's very hard to do anywhere else. So, now one of the biggest cons of everything is people can fast forward through the ads. Everyone's got DVR, and that's going to be one thing we hear people is they're going to say, well, I fast forward through all the ads. Well, first off, you may think you fast forward through all the ads, but you actually don't. They've actually done many, many studies where people might fast forward through anywhere between 30 to 50% of the ads. They might for a certain show, but there's a lot of times they're just sitting there hanging out, you know? Now, one thing that we do to kind of get like around that, and here's a tip that we have for some of our customers. We actually buy a lot of news and we buy a lot of sports. The reason why we buy a lot of news and we buy a lot of sports is because most people will not watch the Monday news broadcasts from 5 o'clock on Wednesday. They're not going to take that newscast and watch it 2 days later. Just like most people aren't going to take that basketball game or that football game or that soccer game and watch it 4 days later. There might be a small amount that do if they want to rewatch it, but that's not going to be what you're watching for the first time for a vast majority of people. So what we typically do is we buy a lot of news and buy a lot of sports because we know people are more likely to watch the ad all the way through. So one thing I do want to end everything with one story here. So the story that I got is, over the last few years, I've heard and I've read a lot of books where people are actually questioning, does advertising still work? And I've signed up a lot of new clients who will ask me that same thing. You sure this works? You sure this works? So I've had a handful of doctors where they might spend, let's say, $7,000 or $8,000 a month in advertising. And what we'll do is we'll phone track everything. So we'll put a phantom number on everything they're doing. So if they're buying this TV station, it's this all number. If they're buying a different TV station, it gets this number. If they're buying a magazine, it gets that number. If they're buying something online, it gets that phone number. We actually phone track exactly where gets the most phone calls, and then we see their overall volume of their phone calls for the entire month. So what I've done in the past is people who, when they question, are you sure this works? Are you sure you can get more phone calls? What I'll say is, look, for the first 3 months, I don't want to spend any money with the way I want to. I want to keep everything the exact same way that you have it. Let's just track it better so we can see exactly how it works. So let's do that for 3 months. And we'll do that for 3 months, and I can show them, okay, well, based on what you've been doing, this is how many phone calls you got, this is how it works. Then, after those first 3 months are up, I then say, look, with your exact same advertising budget, let's not spend a penny more. Let's try a few things I want to try. So we'll buy different stations, we'll buy different shows. We won't buy this magazine, but maybe we'll buy this thing online. Maybe we'll buy this newspaper, but maybe we'll use a mailer. Whatever we figure out as a plan to be, we will then say, with the exact same budget, now let's see how your phone calls go in the next 3 months. And every single time I've done that, I've never not doubled someone's phone calls. There have been a handful of times I've even tripled phone calls. So when that happens, typically I have a client for life. But for those people who say advertising doesn't still work, I've got so much data and proof to show you. I know it works. I've seen it work. So, all right. Well, that is the traditional advertising. I know there was a lot in this week's episode. There's just a lot of information to go through. Thank you so much. This is Ryan Pancoke with the Advertising Blueprints. Tune in next week, and we're going to go over guerrilla advertising and just a few different ways that maybe you can advertise for free.